The special edition of On Point is an interview with renowned author and academic Makarand R Paranjape on his latest book. Hindutva and Hind Swaraj is an exploration of the ideologies of Mohandas, Karamchand, Gandhi and Vinayak, Damodar, Savarkar and their persistent influence on India's past, present and future. And the big question is, does Hindutva and Hind Swaraj overlap? Thank you so much, sir, for joining me on this special edition of On Point. So let me begin this interview.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Let me begin this interview by asking you, by quoting a part of your book, which says, Hindutva needs Gandhi and secular India needs Savarkar. Why?
You know, I try to explain that, if you allow me, partly in the cover of this book, where you can see how Gandhiji and Veer Savarkar, their backs are turned to each other in a manner of speaking. So they are ideological opposites or even adversaries. Yes. But you can see the overlap, you know, and whoever designed the cover, I congratulate them, because you can see it's almost as if their hands are coinciding. The point being that in the Swaraj spectrum, which is very broad, and the Swaraj spectrum is our struggle against, you know, colonial dominance and partly our struggle also against Islamist colonization of a different kind, colonization by a different name. But it was certainly an attack on our civilization, the Sanatani civilization, and, you know, the vandalism and the destruction of what happened is part of what my book looks at. The middle part of my book, it's called Dakshinayan. It's actually the discovery of the tremendous, should I say, violence that was meted out on the indigenous or native civilization of India during the long period of Islamic rule. Now, this was something that Gandhiji did not want to dwell on. But Savarkar recognized that without dealing with the threat of Islamic separatism in India, and he was proven right, because India was partitioned, India would not be able to progress. So in that sense, not just Gandhiji, but the entire Congress downplayed that threat. And, you know, Direct Action Day, before that, the Khilafat, the failed, I would say, Khilafat agitation for the restoration of the caliphate, you know, which even the Turkish people didn't want. I talk about that in the book. And taking up that cause in India was such a blunder. So the point being that India as a whole and Hindu society needs both Gandhiji and Savarkar. And we need Gandhiji because he taught us how to resist power. He taught us how to be fearless, self-reliant, and whether you like it or not, non-violence as a daily practice, non-violence as a method of civic protest is the way to go, and not, you know, recourse to violence as the very first option. And Savarkar is needed to understand a broader strategic vision for India, without which, once again, I think, and we've seen with our wars with Pakistan, the invasion of China, we will be hamstrung. So that's why I said that even if they were ideological, if not opposites, at least they disagreed. India and Hindu society needs them both.
Okay. I'm sorry, Professor, because I'm going to jump because there are parts which have stayed with me. And as any reader, there are parts which don't stay with you. So I'm going to go to those parts which have stayed with me. For example, I was struck by the fact that you have said that earlier colonialism was forgotten, papered over for the nation-state project. And there was a word which you also used, Mili Juli Sanskriti Tehzeeb. So my question is, can medieval India be described as the first colonizing experience of the subcontinent? That's number one. So flowing from that, the second question will be, is Mili Juli Sanskriti or Tehzeeb a modern construct?
Oh, entirely, entirely. I think that first colonization of India, which was very deliberate, and it took place over centuries, and right up to Tipu Sultan, you know, it continued, not just with the invasion of India by Ghazni and then the conquest of North India by Muhammad Ghori in 1191 when he defeated Prithviraj Chauhan. But even earlier, when Muhammad bin Qasim attacked India, conquered a part of Sindh. So this was a long project, and it is still in a way ongoing. We see what happened in Bangladesh. As soon as the regime changed, the Hindus were attacked, the temples were attacked, and earlier in the 90s, the Kashmiris, the Hindus, the Pandits were driven out of Kashmir. So this is an ongoing project and threat, and denying it, ignoring it, we can only do it at our own peril. It's like being an ostrich. And in fact, unfortunately, if the ostrich has its head in the sand, its neck in the sand, then of course someone will go and chop off its neck. So this, unfortunately, was the plight of Hindu society, unable to understand the real threats that it faced. And Savarkar was one of those who identified these threats and expressed them very clearly, whereas Gandhiji was willing to go to whatever extent, you may call it appeasement, you may call it, compromise, in order to have a unified India, which was, of course, a very noble project, but not at the expense, as it were, of Hindu interests. Now, the other question, Mili-Juli Sanskriti, Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, all of this is fine at the personal level, even at the cultural level. Everything that we do today is a legacy of those, 800, 900 years of coexistence, intermingling, music, food, cuisine, as we know in North India, dress, even the topi that Savarkar wore, if you go back to its origins, maybe there is an Islamic influence in that very hat that he was wearing. So you can't separate the Mili-Juli Tehzeeb. You can't deny it. Your Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb. It's like taking, the syrup out of the gulab jamun. That's not the point. But to understand that when it gets politicized, when it becomes a political ideology, as it was for the creation of Pakistan at the hands of the Muslim League, then that Mili-Juli doesn't work. Then it actually becomes an existential threat to one side. Sayyid Ahmad Khan, people haven't seen that he was actually the progenitor of the two-nation theory. He articulated it so very clearly many, many years before the Muslim League. So the point really is that it is not a matter of cultural chauvinism or purification, but it's an understanding of the politics and the dynamics and the ideological opposition. And then once the politics gets weaponized, right? And once you have jihadism, which becomes almost a state ideology, then the Hindu side has to wake up. That's the point of the book. And that's what Hindutva was. Hindutva was a response to what Savarkar saw as this tremendous threat to India and to Hindu society.
You wrote that political Islam is like communism. It erases the past. Indian politics could not defang it. Gandhi failed to comprehend it. Savarkar understood but had no response to it. So my question to you is flowing from another chapter which you wrote, which is forgetting. Do you think we failed to respond because civilizationally we had a different sense of time, where ability to remember and forget were both simultaneously operated at a civilizational level? Does it flow from that?
Very true and very well put. Hindus have a unique, I would say, ability, or you might even say facility, for principled forgetting. What does principled forgetting mean? It means you're going beyond forgiveness. You are really not dwelling on those aspects of the past which can tear you apart. And it's very interesting how in our own records, we have no historical record of Alexander's invasion, which is one of the biggest events in ancient Indian history. In fact, we time so many things because we know the precise chronology of that invasion, even better in many ways than we know the chronology of the Buddha, which happened, 150 years before that. So, but we have no record of that. And even our understanding of Purusha and, Porus comes from Greek history. Similarly, Muhammad of Ghazni invaded India 17 times and we have no record of it at all. So we are a people of principled forgetting, but also of remembering. See, we remember somebody like, Lord Rama, who may or may not be a historical figure. It doesn't matter to us. But he's a civilizational hero, and we remember him over and over and over again. So we have a completely different ethic of remembering than, say, the Jewish people, who never forget, who remember every cut, every wound that was inflicted on them, right? But in a way, in modern times, Indians, Hindus had to learn the importance of history. We entered history in a very violent way through British colonization. And I believe we have come to a point where even if we are not the masters of history, as we try to be masters of time, Kala Bhairava, we are Akalis in the sense that we are Kala Atit. Every Hindu wants to transcend time and space. So we have that civilizational ability, but now we have to deploy it politically, we have to deploy it civilizationally, we have to form a state which can be simultaneously in time very effective and yet have the ability to transcend the limitations of time and space. And only then we can be a Vishwaguru. So some of these things are in the book.
You have written also about history. So what is the function of history, Professor? You write, misjudged past leads to distorted present and future jeopardized by prejudice and falsehood. So can there ever be a history disassociated or decoupled from the power of that way? Is it ontologically possible?
See, you're a historian yourself, so you know that history has multiple meanings. In my book, I show how the modern notion of history, based on a certain form of evidence, documents, inscriptions, verifiable evidence, this is a modern construct. Even the West didn't have it more than about 200 years ago. But we have multiple ways of accessing the past in India. Oral narratives, memories. There are memory studies now all over the world which are important. Not just the kind of history that is taught in universities and codified, in books, but epics, poetry, So India has a rich methodology of accessing the past. But the history as we know it from the Western standpoint is also really important, because otherwise, how do you learn from the past? And even today, we have that problem. We are so much in denial on both sides. I mean, the whitewashing of the ravages of Islamic conquest of India is one problem. The other problem, the other side, wants to write a history without Akbar, without Babur, without Aurangzeb, a history based only on the response, only on Rana Pratap and Shivaji. You can't write a history with, by ignoring all that. So just as you can't ignore the Vijayanagar Empire, the Pallavas, the Cholas, you can't also ignore, the Mughal conquest of India. So you need a history which is not a revenge narrative. And you also need a history which is not denialism and negationism. And this kind of intermediate hermeneutics is what I call it, anvikshiki, an examination of the past with, should I say, the main objective of discovering the truth. That will help us become a great nation once again. That will bring about the renaissance of India, which is really, as yet, not yet a complete project.
Renaissance is a European word, and you have used it here, Renaissance, in the Indian context. Yeah. Okay. Yes. There are a couple of other issues apart from history that you have raised are very, very interesting, sir. One thing which really excited me was when you say that both Gandhi and Savarkar mixed religion with politics. They did. But my question as a reader of the book is, why do you think that Gandhi and Tilak's mixture of politics and religion became far more acceptable than Savarkar's mixing of politics and religion? One, is it because his imagination of a Hindu was different from Gandhi's and Tilak's imagination of a Hindu?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in a way, if you want to give credit to Savarkar, he was probably ahead of his times. He could foresee the damage that a country like Pakistan could inflict upon India. And it's taken Hindus a long time to wake up. We didn't see the threat of this kind of jihadism. That's why in my book I've said that the real opposition is not between Gandhi and Savarkar, but it's between Swaraj and jihad. That is the real opposition that defines, India's trajectory in the last 100 years. And maybe Savarkar saw this early on. But, to give credit to Gandhiji, without him, I doubt whether we would have been a democracy. We might have been, taken over by communism, or we might have been taken over by a dictatorship. So what Gandhiji did, awakening the conscience of the nation, bringing millions into the freedom struggle, his contributions cannot be denied. And it's very unfortunate today that there is an attempt to make Gandhiji some kind of traitor, a collaborator of British colonialism, or even anti-Hindu. I think that we couldn't be more wrong than that. Gandhi was a great Sanatani, Hindu. He was a great Hindu. In fact, the Congress party was much more Hindu in those days than it is today. It's not just Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, Rajendra Prasad, the whole, team that founded the Hindu Mahasabha, Lala Lajpat Rai, they were all congressmen. Keshav Baliram Hedgewar was a congressman. So the Congress was a broad tent. It was not the anti-Hindu type of party that it is perceived to be today. And I must say that Savarkar was also responsible for this rift, because when he became president of the Hindu Mahasabha, he tried to radicalize the Hindu Mahasabha, and he took it in a direction, which was so anti-Congress, so anti-Gandhi, that it harmed the Hindu Mahasabha. In fact, they won no elections at all, never, even after independence. And they actually formed collaborative governments with the Muslim League for, so to speak, pragmatic reasons. But that's why Savarkar was never a popular leader. He never won an election. And the mass of Indians, they never appreciated him. They never liked his brand of Hindutva. And these are facts that we can't ignore. So Savarkar has become a kind of national mascot only in the last 10 years or so, 15 years or so, when the Hindus, as a political entity, as a vote bank, as should I say, as people who have awakened to how important it is for them to consolidate, thanks partly to the BJP, have they recognized how important Savarkar's contribution was?
So, in context of the word colonialism, does Western academia accept the Islamic invasion as colonial? Because a lot of left-wing writers, a lot of other writers who do not concur with it would say that it was a collaboration. For example, a lot of Hindus and Muslims, people from different backgrounds, fought with each other. For example, 1857, a lot of the Rajas, Hindu Rajas, collaborated with the Company Raj. A lot of Rajput kings were in some sort of a alliance understanding with the Mughal Empire.
Totally. Actually, all colonial projects are collaborative. And if you think that Indians, both Hindus, Muslims, also Sikhs, who became the backbone of the colonial army, didn't collaborate with the British, then we have a very mistaken idea of colonialism. Colonialism is always collaborative. It's a collaboration between the rulers and the ruled, and it's incentivized in a certain way. So the Rajputs under the Mughals were incentivized to collaborate. Absolutely right. But that doesn't mean it wasn't an occupation. That doesn't mean it wasn't a form of colonialism. Now, it's because the left doesn't want to accept it, including Edward Said. I've talked about that. Because the left and the Islamists are collaborating the world over, in pushing back against Western imperialism. And so that history of the whole world has been denied and papered over. And I've said that the left in its extreme form, in its Stalinist or Maoist extreme, is also a cult of death, as jihadism is. And that's why they are natural collaborators. But the Hindus love life. We are the people who want rasa. We want to, juice life. And so the real fight is between those who love life and those who love death. The death cults, which are haunting the world even today, the death cults of communism, which produced millions and millions and millions of mass graves, you know, whether it's in China, 40 million people died in Mao's terrible experiments, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, they died of starvation, you know, privation, you know, the gulags and the death camps of the Soviet Union, you know, the Moulin Rouge, the Khmer Rouge, not the Moulin
Yes.
Rouge. In Cambodia, it's terrible, these death camps. And you see the same thing with the jihadists, you know. They love death, they want to kill others. And even in LTT, you saw this cult of death. So I think there's a different way of configuring history, you know, Thanatos versus Eros, if you want to use Freud. And I think we have to explore, in my Itihas Mimamsa, I want to explore all these different ways of understanding the past. And just as a coda, as a footnote, as a student of literature, I've always found historians poaching on literature, you know, and using it as raw material. I reverse the gaze. As a student of literature, I want to show how, you know, literature gives you a better insight into history. I've shown it with Tolstoy in my book. I've shown it with, you know, E.M. Forster, Passage to India, and the greatest example from India, Raja Tarangini by Kalhana, which is a kavya and not an itihasa.
If I tell me if I've got your book right, what I understood at the end of the book was that the only way to decolonize the mind is to break the conspiracy of silence.
Absolutely. You have to speak out, but also anvikshiki, intermediate hermeneutics. So when you're faced with a polar opposition, with a you know, polarization, whether it's ideological, political, intellectual, cultural, social, civilizational, the way is not to identify with one side. That is debilitating. That is allowing yourself to be recolonized, as it were, by, you know, these ideological operations and operatives and get instrumentalized. The way is not to identify with any one pole, whether it's a Gandhian pole or a Savarkarite pole, but to be able to negotiate between these two poles and critically examine. And so I call it the he bhi nyaya, not only, but also. Or if you want to use Sanskrit, you know, the va, which is either or, cha, which is and api. Api means also. So if you do this, you will have a very complex and rich understanding of both the past and the present and refuse, you know, to get polarized and join one side or the other fully.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining me for this riveting conversation on a brilliant book that you have written. I think it's a must-read book, Hindutva and Hind Swaraj, History's Forgotten Doubles. Thank you, Mr. Paranjape, for joining me, and this is all in this special edition of On Point. Thank you.